you do have other people in this deal who put up the money. So you actually have to make sure that they're making their money back, and you have to essentially service that debt. You have to replace that recurring revenue somehow, and you kind of can't just do it overnight.
Hey gang, it's Monday, May 9th. Jasmine, Jeremy, and listeners, welcome to the Behind the Numbers Daily, an eMarketer podcast made possible by mParticle. I'm Marcus, and today I'm joined by two folks. Let's meet them. We start with our principal analyst covering social media. It's Jasmine Emberg.
Hey Marcus, hey everybody.
Hello there. We also have with us our Director of Marketing and Commerce Briefings. It's Jeremy Goldman.
Pleasure to be with you. Happy belated Mother's Day.
Well, depends where your mother's from.
That's fair.
So if you've got an English mother, she had it a few months ago. Don't let her think she needs two gifts. She doesn't listen. She has no idea what's going on. But happy Mother's Day to the American ones. The English ones, we already had it. Jasmine, what about the Finnish mothers?
I was just going to say happy Mother's Day to the Finnish mothers too. It's also
when do they celebrate?
On Sunday.
Same as America.
Same as America.
Finland, what side of the road do you drive on?
The right side, both figuratively and literally.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Anyway, today's fact. Alaska has the longest coastline in the US. It is not even remotely close. 6,500 miles. So that's across America twice. So if you drove from LA to New York and back again, that'll be about 6,000 miles. Alaska's coastline is longer than that, which makes it longer coastline than that of all the other states combined. I don't think I realized how big Alaska was. What's going on up there? Have you guys been?
I have not, but I would love to go.
I really want to go.
Fascinating.
Yeah. Maybe we'll do a live podcast recording there one day.
I want to go now. I know. Let's take care of that.
Well, Marcus, that can be your first stop on the Airstream.
I know. Stuart runs the team. Can we please get some money? I need to get in the Airstream. All right. Anyway, today's real topic. Why Elon bought Twitter and what's next? So, as it seems the entire world knows, Elon Musk bought Twitter. Mr. Elon Musk has more money than any individual on planet Earth, with an estimated net worth of $274 billion, thanks largely to Tesla. He just used $44 billion of his money to buy Twitter. He's taken it private. So when the deal closes later this year, there will be no more shareholders, giving Mr. Musk complete control of the company. As Greg Roumeliotis of Reuters put it, this is a seminal moment for the 16-year-old company, which emerged as one of the world's most influential public squares and now faces a string of challenges. We're going to talk about some of them. Why did he buy Twitter? What changes do we expect to see? What will Twitter look like next year and beyond? What does this mean for advertisers as well? Let's start with why he bought them. Jasmine, I'll start with you. You cover social media for us. Why? Why, in your opinion, did Mr. Musk think $44 billion was a fair price for Twitter?
So there's a lot of different theories as to why Musk bought Twitter. And the reality is that it's probably a combination of all of them. I mean, Musk loves Twitter. It's a hobby for him. And he clearly wasn't happy with the way that it was run and how it was being used. But I think the better question is why Twitter sold to Musk. Twitter has a long history of turning down acquisitions by celebrities and other well-known public figures. We did get a bit of an answer to that during its earnings, as well as the news that broke right after that Twitter had inflated its user numbers over the past 3 years. But I think that's something that we should be focusing on as well.
Yes. Just to let you folks know as well, we haven't covered Twitter yet in the earnings, but we will in a couple of days. So we'll pay more attention to what's going on specifically with Twitter, with users, with revenue, and what's going on with the company. But we want to explore in this episode Mr. Musk and his relationship with Twitter. But Jasmine, I think you're spot on. It's a really good question. We talked a lot about why he's bought it, but to your point, why did Twitter sell? I mean, Jeremy, as Jasmine alluded to at the beginning, it seems like Mr. Musk wanted Twitter to fulfill some kind of personal ambition. He keeps talking about Twitter's extraordinary potential. What was the main reason, in your opinion, why Mr. Musk bought Twitter, or why Twitter sold?
Yeah, I think Jasmine said it well when she said it's a number of different reasons, and it's not any one of these things. We like to simplify these narratives. But ultimately, if you think about it, I want to we've done some research, and it turns out that Elon Musk actually has a lot of money. And because of that, in all seriousness, you should be spending your money. It doesn't do you any good to just have it sitting, in a vault somewhere. So because of that, Twitter is something that he is passionate about. It does seem like he genuinely believes that it can transform the world for the better. Obviously, he also does want to make money off of it. And I think that there are actually some early reports that he could plan to take it public again in, just 3 years. So essentially right the ship, the typical private equity approach, try to improve things, find a better monetization model, and then, spin it off from there.
Yeah, people have been looking at right now, why did he buy it? Twitter doesn't make a ton of money. He couldn't have possibly bought it for financial reasons, at least today. But there's, a couple of years down the road, he could take this public again and make some money from it. He said that having a public forum that is maximally trusted and broadly inclusive is extremely important to the future of civilization. I don't care about the economics at all. So he's explicitly said that. Thank goodness, because Q1 Twitter made just over $500 million in profit on revenues of $1.2 billion. Last year, Google made $257 billion, Facebook made $117, and Twitter made $5. Put another way, Tesla's market cap, which Mr. Musk owns and runs, is $1 trillion. SpaceX, another one of his companies, is 10 times smaller, and Twitter is 2.5 times smaller than SpaceX, the smaller one. So definitely not for money, but this is literally a big deal. $44 billion makes it the second largest buyout in US history, behind only the 2007 deal when a private equity firm, or a couple of them, bought Texas energy giant TXU for $45 billion. So this is, for context, this is massive. What changes can we expect to see? Jasmine, what are you paying most attention to when it comes to changes that Mr. Musk might make with Twitter?
So one potential change that I find incredibly confusing was something that Musk announced recently, and it was a proposal to charge governments and commercial users a small fee. I mean, my first question is, what does this mean exactly?
Yeah.
How do you even define a commercial user? Would it be big brands only, or will small businesses also have to pay? What would they be paying for? Are they paying for a subscription to the whole service? Is it to use certain features? So there's really a lot of questions that have to be answered before you can make this a reality.
So I want to focus on this for a second, because the idea of reducing ads has been thrown out there, and it does seem as though this could be a change that Mr. Musk wants to make, reducing advertising. Former CEO Jack Dorsey even said, "Twitter as a company has always been my sole issue and my biggest regret. It has been owned by Wall Street, and the ad model, taking it back from Wall Street, is the correct first step." So 90% of Twitter's revenue comes from ads. Mr. Musk has said that he could move to a subscription model, not just charging businesses or governments, but also individuals. Twitter's already taken a step in that direction with Twitter Blue, introduced last year. It's a premium service where for $3 a month, you get additional features, an undo button, things like that. But so I say all that to say this, I mean, maybe he wants to charge governments and businesses money because he knows that he can't charge people money for it and get rid of ads entirely. If Twitter was to scrap ads entirely and still make the $4.5 billion they made last year, they would have to charge each of those 200 million plus users $20 each for the year. So I think maybe this means that if you can charge businesses and governments more, maybe the charge for individuals could possibly be less. Jeremy, what do you make of the idea of charging businesses, governments, maybe people, and maybe getting rid of ads?
So, by the way, shameless plug, we ran some numbers along these lines about 2 weeks ago in the marketing and advertising briefing, actually, about how much you would have to do in terms of Twitter Blue revenue in order to fully replace advertising. And the answer is it's very, very difficult to do that in the short term, because you do have other people in this deal who put up the money. So you actually have to make sure that they're making their money back, and you have to essentially service that debt. And, obviously we're not financial analysts, but, you have to replace that recurring revenue somehow, and you kind of can't just do it overnight. So to me, it's an interesting question about how quickly does Twitter pivot to an entirely different model. And also, it's very difficult to train users to behave one way and then say, just kidding, now this is our business model. That's very difficult to do. You might even have better luck if you just had a totally different service, that started out with a totally different model. So I think that's going to be a really tricky tightrope to walk.
Yeah.
That's such a great point, Jeremy. And that's something that we've been talking about quite a lot, is how it is so much more difficult for an established player to innovate than it is for a newcomer. There are so many preconceived notions that come with Twitter because it's been around for so long, and getting users to really change their view of the service or change how they use the service is going to be a monumentous task.
So in February, Twitter had said that Twitter Blue was not critical to reaching Twitter's target of $7.5 billion in revenue by 2023. It was according to the Wall Street Journal. So they at least knew that they weren't going to be switching over from an ad to a subscription model anytime soon, but they were experimenting with this.
I think one thing that's really interesting, and maybe there should be an app for this, maybe we can all collaborate on this idea, which would be taking Elon Musk's tweets and then trying to look to see, like, what's the likelihood that this is going to happen? Or is this something that is serious? Because I think that when you look to see, like, some of the things that he throws out there are certain things that we interpret as, oh, this is very serious. Like Twitter's going to lean into subscriptions, and that's going to be where all their, revenue is going to come from 2 years from now. I just want to, I think this was, just pretty recently, April 27th, he tweeted, next I'm buying Coca-Cola to put the cocaine back in. So it's like, obviously some of these things should be taken, with a grain of salt, to say the least, or a whole lot of grains of salt. And some things should be, treated as, really major hints into his psyche.
Mm-hmm.
I think Musk also tweeted that he was going to buy McDonald's and fix the ice cream machines.
That sounds like something he would.
Maybe, yeah. That's the problem, is he has the money to do stuff like this. Yeah, so you have to kind of half take it seriously, but also not want to.
I think he did say it, apparently. Yeah. So okay. But so he has the ability to obviously move markets by just doing one or two things.
The irony of this is, if could you really call it a free speech platform if you have to pay for it? Because it's not going to be accessible to everyone. They were talking about some ideas swirling around about a pay-to-tweet model. I don't know if he said this, but anyone could see what's on Twitter, but you have to pay per tweet, or even if you have to pay to subscribe to be able to participate. That doesn't really scream free speech. Anyway, let's take a quick word from our sponsor, mParticle, and then we'll be right back with the conversation. At the end of the day, your customer has to be at the center of everything you do. This starts with the right customer data strategy, as well as the right foundation to solve the challenges that typically inhibit success, such as data quality, data governance, and connectivity. mParticle is your real-time customer data infrastructure that helps you accelerate your data strategy by cleansing, visualizing, and integrating your customer data from anywhere to anywhere. Ultimately, better data leads to better decisions, better customer experiences, and better outcomes. See why the best brands choose mParticle. Go to www.mparticle.com. We're talking about ads going away potentially and moving to a subscription model. Advertisers, though, Jeremy, might leave on their own, since most are wary of associating their brands with polarizing content. So maybe Mr. Musk doesn't need to get rid of ads. Maybe if he changes the content moderation policies, which he's talked about, advertisers will pack up and walk out. What are your thoughts on his thoughts on changing the content moderation policies?
Yeah, no, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think that the content moderation is the one thing that he keeps on coming back to, and he's said it enough times that we can probably take him at face value in that regard. He said that he's against censorship that goes, quote unquote, far beyond the law. So the basic problem that he has is that Twitter, to essentially adjudicate what should be on the platform and what shouldn't, it kind of famously had one or two things that it stopped people from sharing right before the 2020 elections. And, he's had issues with that. And I think it does raise a really interesting point. And, I'm curious what Jasmine thinks also. But from an advertising model perspective, if you make yourself a less brand safe environment, then by very definition, doesn't it become less safe for brands? And isn't that harder to court advertising dollars that they're going to need in the short term?
Look, I mean, I think if we've learned anything from this whole saga, it is that Twitter has an outsized impact, not only in the social media landscape, but also in society. Breaking down these content moderation guardrails can have real world impacts. And Jeremy, to your point, it can also impact what advertisers feel and how likely they are to advertise on the platform. I mean, Twitter has made so many important advances in making it a brand safe platform. Most of its advertisers are big brands that don't want their ads to show up adjacent to misinformation, disinformation, or other types of harmful or just unsavory content. So I truly believe that, if there is less content moderation, that a lot of risk adverse advertisers will think twice before advertising there.
And there's a big difference between how advertisers feel about content moderation changes and consumers. 60% of Twitter users, 60, said that they were not at all concerned about changes to Twitter's content moderation policies after the sale, according to Civic Science. Daily users were more concerned, but the majority still lent more towards not being concerned. But there's a big difference, as I mentioned, between consumers and how they feel about content moderation versus advertisers and them potentially leaving the platform. This all sounds good in theory, but in practice, The Economist notes that social networks that began life with the aim of allowing anything legal, such as Parler or Getter, eventually tightened up their censorship after being deluged with racism and adult content. And Mr. Musk says, maybe we'll relax the rules a bit, but we'll still follow the law. On April 23rd, so a few weeks ago, the European Union said it had agreed on the outline of a new Digital Services Act that makes social networks police speech on their platforms more closely. The UK also has one that they're working on. This also confuses me as well, because Mr. Musk says, quote, free speech is the bedrock of a functioning democracy, and Twitter is the digital town square where matters vital to the future of humanity are debated. But here's the thing, it's a private square. It's not public at all. It's a private company. And because Twitter is a private company, it's something that's online as well. And people communicate very differently online. They say things online that they would never say in person. So I'd still find making the comparison from Twitter to a public square quite confusing, because it's a private company, it's not public. And what people say in real life is very different from what they say online. There's a few other things that he's talking about changing, cracking down on bots or automated accounts. Number one, he wants Twitter's algorithm to be made public, an edit button as well. In April, Mr. Musk ran a poll on Twitter, and after 4.5 million votes, 75% of people said, yes, please, we'll take an edit button. Long-form tweets, something he's talked about as well. This last point, though, I'm kind of fascinated to see where this goes, because by taking it private, Mr. Musk can experiment more boldly because Twitter doesn't have to live up to the quarterly pressures to show results. What do you guys make of this? Because every single quarter there has to be more revenue and more users, and Facebook isn't beholden to that, Snapchat, Twitter, all the social properties, and a lot that have gone public, and a lot of the other properties, Netflix, Spotify, the digital giants. Every quarter they have to perform. They have to show that these numbers are going up. And you wonder at sometimes how much that is compromising, improving the quality of the service. Here is a very cool case study, a social experiment to see what happens. What do you guys make of that relief of pressure from Wall Street and what that could potentially mean?
I mean, I think it's pretty solid analysis, and, we'll have to wait and see what happens, but there could be some truth to that. I think the other part that we need to mention too, that it's not only relief of pressure from shareholders, but also from regulators and lawmakers when Twitter becomes a private company.
Yeah.
I hadn't really thought about that second point, but it's really important. I would say, though, that in terms of like, oh, thank God, we don't need to care about the finances. I've heard a lot of people kind of make this argument, and I think that there is some argument to be made that, you can innovate in a different way as a private company. But I mean, you're not beholden to Wall Street, but you are beholden to Avenue of the Americas. That's because a few blocks away from us on 6th Avenue, there are a lot of banks that, basically have provided some of the funding for this deal. And they're not going to say, we don't really care, just, we'll check in a few years. They are going to receive updates about how certain initiatives of his are going on an ongoing basis.
Yeah.
So to say that, I just think people have made it's too much of like now it's just going to be this big innovation factory and there are going to be all these interesting things that are going to happen and they don't have to care about the financial results. You know, they absolutely do.
If he'd bought it in cash and turned it into a non-profit, then it could have been interesting. But they are going to have to make money at some point, or he's going to have to pay the banks back, the investors back at some point, to Jeremy's argument. So finally, guys, what does this do to Twitter long term? I mean, we need to wait for the deal to go through. It could be many months. It's going to close at some point this year, we think. But let's pretend it closes Christmas Day of this year. And what do you expect to see from Twitter in 2023?
First off, I think that legally, or just according to the agreement, it has to close by October.
Okay. Okay. Interesting.
But that being said, you know, there's obviously a lot of uncertainty. I think that one thing that we can obviously expect is more of a pivot towards subscriptions, more of interesting monetization opportunities, because really, I believe over 90% or more of the company's income comes from advertising. And it's not, you know, Jasmine might have better numbers on that, but I think that it will absolutely change, that will become like a healthier, less reliant on advertising model. And I don't think it's all going to be about Twitter Blue and just trying to turn Twitter Blue into the next big thing. There are probably a few things to come from Twitter from a monetization standpoint that we have yet to see. And I think that another key thing is just the fact that it's going to evolve as a platform. I think that it has honestly become a bit of a stagnant platform in terms of some of the things that are coming out there. They're like incremental improvements. They're nice features, but they're not really changing the overall user experience all that much. And I think that his perspective is, well, you know, you should be thinking of yourselves along the lines of Meta, and why aren't you moving as quickly as Meta or TikTok? And that's the approach that he brings to it.
Yeah, I completely agree that we are going to see lesser reliance on advertising. And I can tell you what I would like to see, and it's probably because I'm a little biased since this is the area that I cover, but I do believe that Twitter has a really large untapped potential in both commerce and in creator monetization. And those are two other avenues that it really could start exploring more in order to bring in more revenues. Mm-hmm. It's kind of started to dip its toes in the social commerce waters, so to speak, but there is really big potential. It is not anywhere near a shopping platform the way that Instagram is or TikTok is becoming. And I could see it heading down that path as well.
Mm-hmm. In terms of the quality of the discussion, a recent Axios and Ipsos poll asked folks, how will Elon Musk affect the quality of Twitter discussion? 39% of folks think he'll improve it, compared to 22% who think it will get worse. Heavy users are a lot more likely to think Mr. Musk will make it better. And a recent YouGov poll found that 54% of Republicans thought that Mr. Musk buying Twitter would be good for society versus just 7% for Democrats. And Twitter users do lean Democrat. All right, time now for the post-game report. Jasmine and Jeremy, I'll take a takeaway from you each. Jasmine, we'll start with you. One takeaway from Elon Musk buying Twitter.
I think the big picture in this entire discussion that we've sort of been alluding to is right now, really the best we can do is speculate. We have very little idea of what Musk is actually going to do with Twitter.
Yeah,
we can make assumptions and we can make educated guesses based on his tweets and other comments. But he really hasn't given us any concrete plans. And we know that he is an unpredictable person and he can change his mind at any point.
Yeah, it's even reported that Parag Agrawal, the current CEO, who knows if he'll stick around, but Mr. Dorsey's replacement, he was saying to the employees that we don't really know the direction of the company. We need to wait for the deal to close and then you'll get more information. So if they don't know, we definitely won't know. Jeremy, your one takeaway from the show.
My biggest takeaway is that Twitter is going to be more fun to cover in the short term as a result of this. So thank you very much, Mr. Musk, for that. I appreciate it.
I will second that, Jeremy.
So Hope King of Axios said, recently wrote, social media as we know it is less than 2 decades old and it has a long list of problems. In about the same amount of time, 2 decades, Musk's companies have helped electric cars become mainstream and gotten space rockets to land themselves back on Earth. Are we sure he can't make Twitter better. Caitlin Tiffany of The Atlantic notes that nothing has changed about Twitter yet, but the platform is already different. No matter what Musk does to Twitter's policies going forward, the site will feel more free and less free to a lot of its users, simply because Musk owns it. A free speech placebo pill is already taking effect. That is all we have time for the show. Thank you so much to my guests. Thank you to Jasmine.
Thank you, Marcus. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Great to be with you as always.
And thanks to Victoria. She edits the show. And thanks to everyone listening in. We'll see you tomorrow for the Behind the Numbers Daily, an eMarketer podcast made possible by mParticle.